Hey, hey. We are live on the 3 p.m. session, Pacific time session of the Synth Society Summit, hosted by the Southern California Synth Society. And I'm here with, this is basically, I think you guys are from the Houston, right? From the Houston set. And yeah, so this session is being hosted by the Houston Modular Society, and we're going to be talking about synths and hardware and all that kind of stuff. And we have Brandon now, so I'll actually give Brandon the opportunity to say, Brandon, do you want to start with the set or do you want to close with the set? I'm okay either way, but let me know what you think.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I would start with the set. That's fine. That's what I was planning.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So in that case, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll come back and talk about some synths and hardware. Let's give Brandon the stage, and he's going to do a 10-minute set jam right now.
Yeah, on a
Yay,
modular.
Brandon.
So I'll get my camera repositioned here so you can see the deal.
Yeah, we can hear it, Brandon.
Holy guacamole! That was sick. That was
dope stuff. Good set, Brandon.
Thank you.
No doubt. So, just to remind everybody, this is what we're doing. We are the Synth Society Summit. It is a 3 o'clock session. This is a synths and hardware discussion, and let's go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. We can start with you, Evan.
Sure. My name's Evan Serchuk. I'm an independent sound designer. I've worked for a couple different companies just as an independent contractor. Right now I'm working for Sonicware, who makes the ELZ1 and the new Liven that just kickstarted. In terms of my background, I started with low-end Casio synths and Portasounds and all that kind of stuff, and just running it through multi-effects pedals and stuff like that. So I have more of like a lo-fi background. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about synths and hardware. Yeah.
Cool. And Spike?
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I am Spike the percussionist. Other than being a percussionist and a musician, classically trained percussionist, music director for a flesh suspension troupe that's has chapters in LA and Oakland. It's called Constructs of Virtual Evolution Core. I also host a noise show in Houston called An Exchange of Noise. We've got all those posted. I post all the performances on YouTube, and I have a few bands. I do a lot of studio work, and other than that, just a hardware freak. All my money goes into feeding the machine. Whether it's I actually resisted the modular bug for a very long time because I knew, they don't call it Euro crack for
nothing. That's right.
So, the name is very fitting, but also, I'm just a big hardware freak as well, using a lot of drum machines and other synth noise toys and pedals and stuff like that, et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of thing.
Cool. Good to have you. And Brandon.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm using this mixer, so my mic, I don't know what my levels are like. I'm mostly a hobbyist. I got into modular about 2 years ago, found the Houston modular folks, joined up with them. I've been trying to perform live as much as possible, but with, the whole coronavirus thing, I think I'm going to have to rely on streaming for the near future. I had a classical trained background. I played piano for lots and lots and lots of years, but I also do electronics for my job. So modular just kind of seemed the next thing, right? I mean, I know the music side, now I know the hardware side, and I want to put the two together. So I just love the modular. I love performing. I try to do all hardware. The Vector on my case is probably the most computer thing that I've got going on here. And I like to improvise. I don't like to play pre-programmed sets. So everything I play is all improvised.
No doubt. Well, good to have you, Brandon.
Well,
Appreciate you. And who do we have in the Modular Houston panel here?
Dave Smith, the other Dave Smith. Like I said before, the tofu Dave Smith. I've been programming since the early 80s. I've been through my experience with modular is on the traditional old surge modulars and Moog modulars and that sort of thing. So to be quite honest, I'm pretty lost as to all the new technology that's out there now. It's pretty amazing. And joining the Houston Modular Houston has been very eye-opening to me. But I've been programming since for a long time. I have my own project called Dead Radio Regime, and it's a new project that I've been working on for the last year. Hopefully we'll have something out soon. But I do like to find synthesizers and use synthesizers that a lot of people may have forgotten about, or maybe never gave much regard to. And I have a lot of the normal stuff, a lot of gear I'm sure you guys already own, but that's my background. I actually am in the piano business. If you can't tell, there's pianos all over the place. I have to pay the bills, but that's me.
Cool. And there's someone else there with you. Yeah.
Hey, that's me kind of breaking social distancing rules.
This is the guy who dragged me into this.
Yeah, when y'all hit us up and y'all asked for some non-modular hardware people, obviously Spike and Dave are the first people that came to mind. Spike has the craziest, most eclectic collection of hardware that I've seen. And Dave has a ton of hands-on experience with a bunch of old school stuff. So I'm excited to see what they bring.
No doubt, no doubt. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you guys for being here. This is going to be a good panel. I mean, talking about synths and hardware. I think the first question I want to ask before we get into, I really want to find out kind of all of the great, cool sort of synths that you guys are working with. And I know there's probably some dope vintage stuff and older stuff, or maybe less. I kind of dig the idea of the less popular stuff that are kind of like secret weapons. But before we get into it, like, you know, there's this idea. There's a couple things that I think is happening nowadays where a lot of people are in the box of using soft synths. Then you have another sect of people that are more like dealing with Euro rack and stuff. But what do you think for people that kind of have a hankering for synths and stuff, and they want to get involved in that stuff? Do you recommend hardware synths, or do you kind of recommend other stuff? And if there's hardware synths that you would recommend for people to kind of get into, or that you're passionate about and want people to know about, what are those synths that you would kind of say, this is the one you need, these are the kinds that you should check out? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I guess I can start. So I would say I'm like a VST freak. I love plugins, and there's so much you can do with it. I would say like a great place to start is find VSTs that look inviting to you. Even a good way to learn is if you have Ableton. There was this whole like early wave of VST plugins that were like, there was this program called Synth Edit. There were a bunch of really like entry level, like build your own VST like programs that were basically like modular before like modular was kind of a thing. And so if you really want to dive into a bunch of different sounds and like learn about synthesis, like just find some plugin that's really inviting. It has like easy controls. Like I really like, there's this program called Locomotive with the V at the end. If you find that VST synth, it's a VST and AU and it's 64 bits. So you can use it with like modern Ableton. That's a great like hardware-ish synth to play with. And as I was saying to Spike earlier before the stream, it was like you have an infinite amount of audio effects to play with, like reverbs and delays and all kinds of stuff. So you can start with something that's like a relatively simple VST and really build something that's like has a massive sound, or make something, play it, and then sample it. So for me, at least my background, I just started with like drum loops and like what some people might consider like crappy VSTs. And that kind of like, that from there I was just watching YouTube videos to be like, what's a VCO? Like, what's an envelope? And then that's my origin story. So you don't need to start with, buying a boutique, synthesizer, or like even, an entry level synth. Like just rock the VSTs until you figure it out.
Yeah. And I got to say for myself, when I got into synthesis, it was VSTs and just various whatever I could come across. And I found that I was searching for a certain sound. And because my knowledge of synthesizers and synthesis in general was so small, I had no idea what I was really looking for. But, in my mind, I was thinking like every synth can do every synth. Like, why do people have... Right, like in my ignorance, I would have never thought to have this like this. Know what I mean? It was just kind of like what I realized later in life is that what I've been searching for is that Moog sound, because that's the stuff that I'd grown up hearing so much on all of everything that ever kind of resonated with me. And then it took me years to realize that that's a certain synth sound, and then this other thing is another certain synth sound. So what synths, and I'll just kind of go around the room, what synths, hardware synths are kind of like your faves, just in general?
That's the tricky question to answer.
Because it depends on what you're doing. I know that there's a lot of sort of qualifiers there, but best efforts on the acid.
Right. Yeah. So like you just mentioned, a Moog sounds like a Moog. And of course that's due to the learning as you start messing with it more about the ladder filter and the design that Bob Moog incorporated into the sound of that filter, because the filter really colors the sound and things like that. You get into the different hardware, you get into the other types of filters. You pick up a Sherman filter bank and it sounds like a Sherman filter bank. But as far as like favorite things, like for me right now, actually, let me grab the other one, is this thing. You guys know what this is?
Oh, no.
Yeah, what is that?
Okay. Everyone's seen this, right?
Oh, the old mono?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are the guys who actually created the idea of using a grid to create music with, right? Monum was kind of the instigator. That was 2006 or something like that. I think after that, the industry started running with making, grid type interfaces and stuff. And we see them all the time now, like all the Akai stuff, what's that, Polyend, some of the other things. This doodad here, this is what's called a Norns, and it's basically like a audio computer, I guess you could call it. It runs a whole bunch of scripts that are community programmed. It's a Linux-based, I think, little computer in there, and it can be a sound generator, it can be a sampler, it can do granule stuff, it can sequence, it can, all sorts of sound manipulation, all sorts of sequence manipulation. In fact, so I use 3 of these currently, but right now I have hooked up. I have one of them hooked up. The other one that I brought with me hooked up, and it's right now it has a Euclidean sequencer on it playing drum sounds. With just not too much, 3 knobs, 3 buttons, and a little screen. And it also has a built-in battery, and you put a little thing on the bottom here, that the little USB ports, two stereo, pair of stereo ins, pair of stereo outs, and a headphone jack. And this little nubbin here is the little Wi-Fi thing, so you can actually Wi-Fi right into it and load sounds, load scripts. They even created a web interface for it called Maiden, which lets you control it from a web interface and kind of, a librarian of sorts, to be able to manage it. It also works in conjunction with this thing. It's called an ARC, and this is 4 very, very high resolution knobs that allow you to manipulate things as well, whether it's sequence controls or manipulating sounds. Like there's one script I use called Mangle, MANGL, and like the knobs, when you're running that script, let you change like the speed and direction of the sound, the pitch, the jitter, things like that. And so very, very powerful little boxes, a lot of bang for the buck in what they'll do. And of course you can also send MIDI clock to them, via USB. I've got a little USB converter. And so, yeah, and then it controls, like, let me re-angle this a little bit. I've got, I brought the Deluge with me as well. So see, here's another version of a grid. But over here, this is a fader box.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. Those things are sick.
Yeah, so I use this one. I drag around with me because it has a lid, but I have 2 others at home. The one that's like 72 knobs on it, and the other one's like...
You've got that one? That thing's a beast.
Yeah. So the one with the knobs on it, I think it's called the PC12, I think. That one, using Norns, I've almost run out of knobs before, because there's so many parameters you can control on some of the scripts. Like you've got a sound playing, you can also filter it, you can add delay, add reverb, change the amount of the type of reverb, the shape of the range, the shape of the time of the feedback and the filter, of the delay, all of those sorts of things, and all under one little silver box. So it's an interesting.
So Spike, you know what I think is interesting about what you're saying is that when we think about synths and hardware, at least some of us that may not be as or as familiar with some of the tools you introduce, but I think what's interesting is that there's I was just talking with somebody in this idea of using a fixed architecture synth. You're kind of having to work with what the designer of the synth has set up for you to work with. And I think what's really dope and what's interesting about what you're saying and the tools that you just held up and what the hardware that you just held up is that it's about running scripts and kind of you can make those things into what you need them to be. And you don't have to think within this sort of paradigm that the synth designer set up for you. And I like that idea that there's this sort of juxtaposing these sort of they're just different ideas, and I like the fact. Do you find that you are more on that side of the thing, or do you kind of mixed with the fixed architecture thing and these things that can kind of become what you need them to be as tools? Or
that's a great question because I'm such a hardware freak, and actually I emailed myself a photo. Maybe I'll try and pull it down real quick in a bit, and you guys can see what my studio normally looks like because I use, I have 8 to 10 different drum machines. So I have like the Yocto 2, which is the 808.
Oh, nice.
But I don't know if you guys have heard of Michigan Synthworks. He does custom build outs and stuff for people. He modified my Yocto 2, so it has every single parameter of every sound can be, like tweaked and warped way more than like a standard 808. And then there's a guy on Reverb that sells the Nava 9, which is a 909 clone, but he tricks it out completely. I think there's, oh God, I don't even know how many knobs are on the front faceplate of this thing, but it's like every parameter of each analog sound can be tweaked. It kind of almost looks like if you took all the knobs off of that Vermona DRM Mark III drum brain and stuck it on a 909. That's what it looks like. So I'm very much into the hardware things where it's kind of it's almost a one-trick pony. It's a great horse, but it does what it does really
very well. Yeah, that's always admirable. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and then you take those sources and I'll put it into something like the Norns or into the Deluge and things like that, or I'll wire them all together at the same time and run. I'll throw a distortion pedal and destroy the sounds coming out of the drum machine or something like that, in real time. Because like Brandon, I like to perform live. A little bit of improvisation and stuff like that, but a lot of times I like to, for instance, I almost nightly during the plague now, I've been doing streaming with my solo project called Astrogenic Hallucinating, and I do this thing called late night noise for late night fiends. It's basically music for people on drugs. Black ambient drone, kind of noisy, stuff.
Right.
And I'll do these performances, and I'll feed everything into like video synthesizers. Which, by the way, I watched that one with Hypno. I bought that module right after watching the video.
Yeah, it's an incredible module, right? Yeah.
So I use things like Structure and some of these other video modules that are out, and I'll just live perform on YouTube. And use all that hardware simultaneously with something like Norns or the Deluge and stuff like that, and just real time. Because again, there's a tactile interface. I guess as a percussionist, I like the instrument you can touch.
Right.
So
yeah. I think the tactile stuff is very, very important for at least for me. I mean, I really like that tactile touch and feel. But I want to jump down to Dave Smith, the other Dave Smith. What synth do you what do you have right there? I see that there's a synth in front of you. What are you working with there?
This is something that I would have thought I would have never liked back in 1999, but it's actually an Italian keyboard by a company called General Music. And everybody overlooked it because the factory sounds, especially back then, everybody was looking for a good piano. Well, the piano in here sucks. But what everybody didn't realize is this thing can be a 32-part multi-timbral instrument. It has 128 different types of filters in it. A single patch can have 24 oscillators going at once. It reads Akai and Sonic, Kurzweil, EMU, WAV files, AIAF files, So it's open-ended like crazy. So once I started messing around with it, my first one I got actually was off the Beach Boys. Long story. There were 2 versions of the Beach Boys running around. And to be honest with you, I don't know which version of it was. But it was a 76 key version. And this one here is an 88 and it's full weighted. But the sounds that are in it are, I think it's the most warm sounding digital synth I've ever heard, even now. And I've had a lot of synths over the years. But it's extraordinary with especially pads, but it's also one of the most dynamic synths I've ever owned. It can go from extremely mellow and quiet to screeching loud, just based on how you're playing it. And like I say, it's 32 part. You can zone it into 32 different parts if you want to. If you're using the sample translator, you can have 88 separate samples plus dynamic layering on every key. So you could have hundreds of samples set up on your keyboard at once. It has an internal hard drive. It's SCSI based. It also has a SCSI port on the back. But the sounds that are in it they can be a little dangerous. And when I'm using it, I use it a lot for pads. But I'll be the first to tell you, it fills up the entire spectrum. So you have to figure out a way to make it fit because it has a lot of low end. You have to really be careful with your EQ. You got to create a space for it because the sound is so freaking thick. It will take up the entire frequency spectrum if you're not careful. But, it is a personal favorite of mine. It is also one heck of a controller because it has a bunch of faders on it. And they're all controllable. You can program them. I mean, it has 4 pedal inputs on it. It has 2 separate MIDI ports. So you have 32 MIDI channels in and out on it and throughs. Not that I use it, but it also has one heck of a drawbar organ on it because you can turn these faders into drawbar settings, and the built-in Hammond Infinite is pretty amazing. But the main thing is it's just a fat, big sounding synth. And it's probably my favorite old synth that I've got right now.
Nice. It sounds like from all the stuff that you just described it, well, with the exception of SCSI, it sounds like it was ahead of its time technologically.
Well,
right?
it came out in
SCSI
'98, so SCSI was ahead of its time even then.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, it has tons of effects in it. I don't use a lot of the effects and that sort of things, but and I never use the sequencer. The sequencer that's in it is powerful, but I don't need it for that. It has a programmable arpeggiator, which is really cool. You can do some crazy things.
I love ARPs. I love a good ARP.
Well, the cool thing is, with a 32-part multi-timbral operation, you can decide which of the 32 parts are using the arpeggiator and which ones are not. So if you want to create something that is extremely insane, you can really do it. But it is a big, thick sounding synthesizer, and it is a personal favorite. I have a lot of new synths that I like a lot too. I'm real fond of the Roland JDXA. I think they missed the boat off the bat because a lot of the sounds that were on board when it first came out were not maybe the strongest sounds. It was okay, but I've had one now for about 3 years, and I've programmed a lot of sounds in it, and it is extremely capable.
Nice.
But other synths, I like synth. A lot of people may have forgotten about is a Kawai K5, which was an additive synthesizer. Yeah. Oh, there I see somebody waving.
Yeah.
Weird synth. A pain in the ass to program. Excuse my language. Yep. But it really is a pain. But it doesn't sound like anything else. The closest description you can get to it is maybe a PPG 2.2, but it's not. The sound is quite bizarre. But I love to use stuff maybe people have forgotten about or maybe didn't even consider. And this is one of them right here. So
let me ask you, and actually, hold on a second here. So Brandon, I want to ask you a similar question, like what you're into, but I thought this was a good question coming from, and I don't want to let this question get lost in the comments. What's a good entry level hardware for a noob? And the reason I think that's a good question is because I think hardware synthesis and hardware in general is fascinating to a lot of people, but we are in an age where, there's a lot of people that are young adults that probably have only ever used soft synths. Right. So I don't know, what kind of things would you all recommend for that person that's kind of is in that space?
Man, that's a hard question. I think it really depends on what your budget is.
So
I
let's go with
know.
that budget options.
Yeah, so if you're going budget, like, I mean, I the reason why I jumped on the Kawhi boat when he mentioned that is my first synth was a rack mount K4R. There are a lot of old school, they call them like PCM synths. Basically, they were just like basically like a Rompler, which means that it's really just low bit rate samples. So if you can find like an older synth that's like a piece, considered like a PCM based synth, I really like the Yamaha SY series. They're kind of under celebrated, but a lot of them have, be underneath them, they have the same kind of FM engine as a DX7, which is really like the big 80s wave thing right now. So for example,
I think that's a dope thing that you're saying there in general, just because I think when people think like, yo, I want a synth or I want some hardware, they automatically think of all the new stuff. And there's so many older things that fly under the radar that are probably priced exactly right with a lot more power under the hood than you would get out of something brand new, right?
It's hard to not jump on those Volcas, because they're so cheap, and it's new hardware, and it's great. There's even the Volca FM, or the little DX thing. It'll even load DX files into it and stuff like that. But kind of what you're getting at, where it's like, you get one of these older ones, and it's like there's the uniqueness to it. But yeah, the newer ones, it's kind of hard not for someone new to just jump on something like that. That's that inexpensive,
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, if you're budget limited and you don't want to go jump on the eBay train, I personally like the eBay train, but a lot of people don't. The Roland boutique synths are an awesome place to start. The Korg Volcas are awesome. Like the Korg Volca sample is really cool. The Volca keys is awesome. Those synths being awesome is the reason why Sonicware is making the new Live-In synth, which is basically just like an overgrown Volca with a looper built into it. The Volcas are like a really awesome place to start. And the cool thing about those is there's a cool mod community behind them, and there's a ton of tutorials. The older synths, it can be like, oh, you have the manual and a dead Yahoo user group. Learn how to use the synth. Whereas with the Volcas, there's video after video after video of people pushing those to the edge. So from a budget perspective, those are a great place to start. Plus they all have MIDI in. So later, if you want to integrate them into your DAW, you're done.
Chiming in with the MIDI, especially on the Volcas, because surprisingly, I've run into some people recent, that have jumped into getting into some hardware synths. They really hadn't wrapped their head around MIDI, and even just MIDI clock. Hey, send some clock to your stuff, sync it up. Well, and they're like, what is that? Oh, okay. Well,
right.
You got to go back to the '80s a little bit and pick up on some of these basic things as well, like hooking these things together. And that's what's really cool about the Volca, because it kind of it's a crash course in even with clock. You've got analog clock on all of them, as well as MIDI, and some MIDI control in some cases. And like Evan was saying, the mod community on those things is insane. Don't ever search for it on YouTube, because then your feed will be flooded with it forever.
Yeah. I just wanted to show this, the Live-In 8-bit warps that Evan was speaking of. And I think that's going to be one of those things that's probably going to be a good entry level synth. And honestly, it just looks and sounds, or when I play with it at NAMM, it's just a fun synth, and it sounds great I don't even like the idea of saying this sounds great for what it is, because I think saying something great for what it is or great for the money it kind of belittles the thing
Yeah.
to a degree. And I just think, forget for what it is. This is a great synth, and you just happen to be able to get it for a reasonable price. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's gonna retail for 200, so about as much as the Volcos are, and it's got a bunch of different sound engines in it. If you want to do wavetable stuff, it can do that. If you want to do more traditional, 8-bit video game sounds, it can do that. If you want to do like a 2-op FM kind of more metally, kind of like tingly sounds, you can do that too. And then it's 128 step sequencer, and kind of the workflow is that you can make your sequence and then you can bounce it to an internal audio loop, and you can have 3 audio loops and then a 4th external audio loop. So yeah, we're kind of like knee deep in the development on that right now. And it'll be a series, like the same hardware but different software in it, so there'll be different series for that kind of all do different things. It's kind of like the Volca's like cousin-in-law, like they're not actually related, but they work well together.
I gotta say, I enjoy this interface better than the Volcas. I personally, the Volcas are a little too small for me to. I mean, they're not too small. I just don't enjoy that. And there's somebody like, but you like modular. I'm like, I don't know, it's a different beast. Anyway, I do like the live in 8-bit warps interface a bit better than the Volcas. But hey, I want to jump down to let's go down to Brandon. What are you kind of working with right now? I know you did a Eurorack set for us, but in terms of hardware synths and those kinds of things, what kind of things are you into now?
Lately, I've been getting into Electron gear. I just picked up an Analog 4, but I also got one of these, the Cycles, which I think is really, really good for starters. It's very performable, not too deep. It's just deep enough to get some good sounds out of it. Honestly, the newer Electron stuff is pretty cool.
I would agree with that. They sound great. They sound. This thing sounds really nice. So,
But my sentimental favorite, if I'm being honest, old school Elect Tribes. I love groove boxes. He mentioned PCM. These are PCM, but they sound awesome. The effects on them are really, really good for its age. The tubes. I love sampling stuff and running it through the tubes on here, the tube drive. But you were talking about starter synths. And I think if you look secondhand, this is actually a very good starter synth right here. You can pick these up for about the price of a Volca, and they're way more powerful. They're full poly. They sound great, got good effects, have MIDI control in, out, and through, which lately you can't find through. But
that was my first synth.
Yeah,
and so I obviously agree with that.
So for people who aren't familiar and can't see the label, what is that synth?
Oh, this is a Microkorg, and it even has like a vocoder, which I don't have the mic anymore, but there's a hookup for a mic on the back. You can run your voice through a vocoder on here, but it has, it's subtractive synthesis. It's all virtual, but it sounds good and it's full poly. It's a great starter synth. And you can use it in a mix to make pads and all kinds of stuff. And they have different versions, and different versions have different set sounds, but it has a full synth engine in it. A little hard to program on the older ones. I think the newer ones might be better. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I want to chime in on that Microkorg because that was my first synth, and so in the 90s I was in different musical outfits, groups, and rap groups, and performance. Started as an MC and couldn't really find a vibe that I was looking for with working with producers, and ended up started producing myself. And when I did that, the first thing that I got an MPC, and then that thing. And they were just coming out, and it was like one of those things where the guy's like, yeah, they're sold out. That's the last one. I was like, well, I'll take that one. And he's like, that doesn't have a box or a manual. I'm like, right. Got a power cord, wrap it up. Right. And I took it home. And to your point, it is not the easiest thing to program if you've never dealt with a synth, because it's on a grid, and if you don't understand what those things are, what the different. So anyway, but it sounds great, and there's a variety of sounds in there. So that's actually a good option too for people. It's small, It's a bit older. There's a huge community out there for them that you kind of get help with them from. But I want to throw it over to Dave Smith because he's got that beast of a machine fired up right now. I'd like to hear a little bit of it if we can.
These are patches that I programmed recently. Just to start off. Now we'll go for something more violent. Here's one I call Stevie Synth.
Jeez, that is so great. Good, jeez. Sounds really incredible. Nice.
So some big pads, but it's got I'm just scratching the surface. It can hold 3,000 patches. It's pretty crazy. One of the nice things is it's one of the first synths that actually had a patch search feature. So you can search by all your sounds by categories. So if you want to look at all your pad sounds, once you hit the pad button on here, it will pull up nothing but pad sounds regardless of what bank they're located in. Can really save you a lot of time. It has a notepad function in it too, which is pretty cool. But it's a really adept synth. I use it a lot for pads. You can hear it a lot on the music. A lot of times it's way in the background because, like I said, it will eat up your entire.
Oh, it has a huge sound. I can totally see what you're saying. It has a super huge sound.
That's just the individual sounds. You can also, and the individual sounds can have 24 oscillators going, but keep in mind, you can put it in performance mode and you can stack 16 of those. So what's 16 times 24? I'm not going to try, but that's how many oscillators you can have going at once. So it could be absurd.
Holy crap.
The performance mode is insane. I'll play one patch real quick. Just one.
Nice.
Holy crap!
So that's like 3 patches layered. Understand, I have
Everybody
one
started
performance
being
that actually
jealous.
has 12 parts. So it's 12 patches stacked and layered up and down the keyboard.
How hard is it?
Very cool.
Cost.
These are easy to find used if you, well, maybe not as easy as it was a couple of years ago, but you can actually find probably a 61 key or 76 version of these for just a few $100s now. Somebody mentioned the SY series earlier. That's a great, you can find SY85 is another keyboard I was going to mention, and somebody beat me to it. That's a great first keyboard for somebody because it hits a lot of spots. So it really is a quite a nice unit. Now this one is the 88 version. I've seen these recently for $700-800. The 61 and 76 for less than $500.
Nice. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
on that note, I really wish we had more time to talk about, because when we start talking about all these different synths, whether they're older ones, rare synths that are not as well known, like that's a rabbit hole for me. You know what I mean? It's seriously a rabbit hole for me. But hey, we got to get out and close out this thing and get to the next session. But I want to thank you guys for joining the Synth Society Summit, and this has been a good conversation. I really appreciate all of you all for stopping by. And Brandon, thank you for that dope set in the beginning, and thanks for all of your input. And the other Dave Smith, thank you for bringing that behemoth of a synth and playing it.
That thing's amazing. Holy. If it sounds good through YouTube, you know it sounds actually good in person.
Yeah, when we run it in the auditorium, I have to roll all the bass off because we have a powered sub in here that'll make all the pianos start to slide across the floor. Seriously.
If we have 5 seconds, I could share my screen real quick. I could show the rig that I was talking about. If that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Let me see.
Oh, hell yeah, Spike.
Share screen. StreamYard. Allow. I guess you should be seeing my screen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh shit!
Oh wow, we went down a wormhole.
You guys see this?
We can see your browser.
Oh, you can't see the picture?
Infinity times.
Dang it.
No, we can't see the picture.
Okay. That's okay.
I'm in the Matrix.
Okay. Let me see if I can. No, I don't know how to switch it back. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no problem.
Worries.
Well, maybe we'll get a chance to do this again. I definitely do look forward to getting a chance to talk to you guys more in depth on some other events that maybe the SoCal Synth Society plans in the future. So, stay tuned.
I want an hour with Dave Smith, man.
Hey, come on down, man.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much
Hey,
for
thank y'all so much, man.
It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. And I hate being
people,
on camera, so hey.
For the people in the chat, the next panel that I'm going to jump over to is SD Mots. In or out the box? That is the question. So, Jono, I'll be right over and let's get this conversation started.
Awesome. Great meeting,
All right.
guys.
Awesome.